Good evening and welcome to the newest presentation of Blueprint Houston's series on the Next Million. I'm Joe Webb. I'm your host tonight for this week's Public Affairs Public Access session, and with us tonight are Margaret Wallace Brown, the Interim Planning Director for the City of Houston, Shannon Buggs, the Director for the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities, and Marissa Aho, who is the Chief Resiliency Officer for the city, along with Jim Hill, who is an architect and urban planner, vice chair of Blueprint Houston, and I'm an architect and urban planner and the immediate past chair of Blueprint Houston. And so a quick bit of backstory for those of you who maybe are joining us for the first time. Blueprint Houston advocated for years for the creation of a general plan by the City of Houston and for the City of Houston. So in September of 2015, that effort paid off when City Council adopted what is called Plan Houston. Plan Houston documents not only vision and key goals for the city, it also establishes 12 core strategies and 95 actions and related goals that'll be instrumental to our city in achieving our vision and making this city the city that we want as we work towards being resilient to boot. Blueprint Houston has been advocating the completion of the evolution of Plan Houston, and through the development of the strategies and actions that are set forth in that plan. And in order to do that, we've embarked on a series that talked with hour-long TV programs related to growth, development, mobility, transportation access, neighborhoods, housing, infrastructure. And tonight, we're actually going to add resilience and complete communities to that conversation. Now, if you'd like to see some of those previous sessions, they are on Blueprint Houston's website and also on Houston Media Sources' YouTube page. And initially, we've explored holistically several of the factors that will impact how we accommodate the next million people and how planning for our shared future is important to each of us and to the health of our city. So tonight's panel is the 8th program in this process, and it's devoted to complete communities and a resilient Houston, and how those concepts are integral parts of planning for both our future and of Plan Houston. And I'll need to let you know and to remind us, to tell you the truth, as we discuss our topics tonight, you can call in, ask questions. We'll get to you as quickly as we can and hopefully get some input. That number is 713-807-1794. Now I'm going to throw it to Jim.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you and welcome to our guests. As Joe mentioned, this is a continuing series for us, Blueprint Houston, who we've been advocating for the continuation of the fleshing out of the general plan for Plan Houston. And about a year and a half ago, we sort of hit on this notion of the next million, and that was as a way of focusing our attention on the kind of growth that we anticipate seeing in the Houston region for over the next, I think it's about 25 or 30 years. The 1 million specifically refers to the growth that's expected within the city limits of Houston. However, if we take a little broader view of that, we can see that the projections are that Harris County will grow by 2 million. That includes the 1 million in Houston. And then the region is expected to grow by about 4 million. So I don't see these slides up on the screen. There we go. So if we can just go on to the next one. As Joe mentioned, this focus of tonight's discussion will be about complete communities. But I'm going to kind of set the stage by going through a few slides talking about the growth projections, as I mentioned. So Houston will add about 1 million, metropolitan area about 4 million, which means that Houston will capture, according to projections, about 25% of that growth, which we think is kind of low, actually. This being the sort of center of the region, we need to talk about how we can sort of increase market share, if you will. So next slide, we can look at, however, we have to point out that there are some constraints to growth in Houston. One is just the physical city limits. We used to grow by annexation. As people moved out to the suburbs, we would just simply annex them back in. For various reasons, that just simply doesn't happen anymore. So we're kind of stuck with the city limits that we have. Although the ETJ the gray area here on the slide, you can see that encompasses and actually goes beyond Harris County, but rough approximation of Harris County. Next slide, please. Some additional constraints are that we've always known that we had flooding, but after Harvey, it kind of refocused our attention on the fact that quite a bit of our land area is susceptible to flooding and should probably be taken off the table in terms of development. I mean, that's still under discussion, of course. But next slide, please. But if we look at some of the areas within the city, this is sort of looking at River Oaks and Memorial Park. Areas like that are stable. I mean, you're not going to fit any more people in there. River Oaks will forever be a single-family subdivision, and not expected to see a whole lot more density. But you see the areas around that, the Washington Corridor and Uptown and Westheimer. Those areas are filling in very quickly and changing very dramatically in terms of the character, from being old single-story strip centers to high-rises now. So that's a lot of growth going on in those areas. So it's a little spotty. But next slide. This is actually a very interesting graphic produced by the planning department. And it shows you the size of the circle represents this is platting activity, so the size represents the number of lots in each plat. And you can see that the activity within the city limits, the yellow area, it's pretty small stuff. It's things like a single-family lot being split into 2 or 3 lots. The big activity in terms of large-scale platting of land, that game is kind of over in the city right now, within the city limits, but it is still going on. You can see where the big dots are in the unincorporated areas of Harris County. So it's a different kind of development than what we've historically been seeing. Next slide will show us that this kind of makes the point that our growth areas, the great majority of the growth is still going to happen at the periphery. So we've got the suburbs, the places like Cinco Ranch and so forth, is going to continue to have the kind of activity we've been seeing, this platting of single lots. Whereas what's going on in the inner city area is a lot of densification, and which is not always welcome in the neighborhoods. That graphic you may recall from the Ashby high-rise, taking over the neighborhood around it, which is affluent single-family homes. Next slide. This now, to kind of focus in on tonight's topic, this is a map of the city that highlights the now 10 complete communities area. The program began as 5 areas, as sort of a pilot. Then the initial phase of that has been completed. Well, Shannon will talk about that in due course. But now it's 10 areas, and you can see that there are kind of underserved neighborhoods. This is a target program that is trying to bring these neighborhoods up, at least for a start, to median, and then hopefully beyond that. But you can see that they kind of occur all over the city. Next slide, please. And if we this is actually not one of the complete communities, although Acres Homes is on the left side of this slide. But this is just a typical aerial of a part of Houston that shows a lot of single-family lots and a lot of, the commercial corridors is a different kind of development along the arterial highways. According to 1 million, if we try to think about adding 1 million people, the area represented in this picture needs to take about 50,000 people. So you can see that it's already fairly fully developed. How do you fit 50,000 people within that picture? Next, please. Well, Plan Houston, we hope, was a way, what we think, and do believe that this is a way, you've got to think ahead about this kind of stuff and plan for it and make sure the proper infrastructure is in place, et cetera, et cetera. So we were very excited to see Plan Houston come into fruition, and we worked very hard to make it happen for many years. Next, please. And specifically about neighborhoods, there's a lot of language and a lot of strategies and goals in Plan Houston that specifically are about neighborhoods. To nurture safe and healthy neighborhoods is one of the core strategies. And I'm not going to go through all the points there, but obviously there's a lot of actions about how do we make that happen. Next. So, next million, the implications for neighborhoods are, where do we put density? Where is it appropriate to do that? And how do we do that while maintaining neighborhood stability and character? As you could see, the platting activity has been typically single families to townhomes, but how do we get larger scale development to happen here? And then to bring the resilience piece into it, things like Harvey's refocused our attention on things like flooding and recovering from shocks. I guess you would call that. Is that a shock or a stress? No, that's a shock, right? Yeah. Okay. And then finally, we'll begin. Actually, we'll begin with complete community. So I think that was the last slide. I think there's one more that, yeah, this is just sort of a typical picture that shows neighborhoods in transition. This is kind of an inner loop area where the little house in the middle is what everything used to be, and now it's, each lot is now 2 or 3 townhomes that fill the entire property. So just one of the things. And then just to close that, just to remind us, 1 million in Houston, 4 million in the region, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're done with the slides now. Let me open it up for discussion. So as we said, we're expecting Houston to grow by 50% over the next 25 years. So is your neighborhood ready to grow by 50%? Just kind of throw that open for anyone to jump on.
Well, I'm happy to start.
Sure.
Being the newest to Houston, I arrived in February and chose Midtown as the place where I would live. And I think my neighborhood is able to grow by 50%. And part of the reason why I chose Midtown was because I had a very lengthy commute when I lived in Los Angeles, and now my commute is less than 10 minutes. And I'm able to take transit, which I love. I'm able to take the bus. I'm able to walk and bike. And so all of those choices are now available to me, and I have fantastic neighbors, some of whom are in their 20s and excited to be downtown, millennials, if you will. And some of them are empty nesters, and they're excited to come back to the city and have been giving me examples of where to walk and eat, and they say that that's the best, most best location in town.
Yeah.
So I'm enjoying exploring my new neighborhood.
Well,
And then I live in the greater Third Ward, and my neighborhood is definitely prepared to grow by 50%. Just by having such amazing universities as University of Houston and Texas Southern University, we are planning for their growth and continued success. And there is densification happening around those 2 major institutions. But I also grew up in a different, and Greater Third Ward is one of the complete communities, and I grew up in another one of the complete communities, Fort Bend, Houston, in the Chasewood subdivision.
Okay.
And when you had that platting activity map, and saw all the little places where people were actually doing building, in Fort Bend, Houston, there was just one lonely little dot. And there's plenty of open and vacant land out there, and it's not a long commute. Now that you've turned 90 into the Audubon between Fort Bend and the medical center, it is super easy to get in from that part of Houston. And that is a neighborhood that is ripe for the investment that stopped. My parents purchased a home in Chasewood and the subdivision Chasewood in Fort Bend, Houston, and they were the first African-American family to move into that neighborhood. Within 3 years, the demographics of the neighborhood had shifted, and the developer was no longer building in the neighborhood. So when we talk about resiliency strategies, we are also talking about the long-term stressors of neglect that came from redlining, from banks and insurance companies. There are folks who have wanted to build and grow and maintain their homes and never had the financial resources to do so because their neighborhoods were ignored by a lot of our institutions. So the Complete Communities effort that Mayor Turner launched is not different from the other neighborhood strategies that other mayors have done, such as Neighborhoods to Standards that was under Bob Lanier. But what Mayor Turner has done is said we can no longer afford to be incremental in our approach to addressing the concerns. If we're going to be a global city that can continue to attract that 1 million people and compete on a world scale, all of our neighborhoods must get to the correct standard where there are amenities that all people deserve to have access to. And so his effort is to not do it in an incremental approach, but to really move things forward at a pace that allows those neighborhoods to embrace that economic development, but also grow their own resiliency as individual families, and to develop a quality of life that allows them to sustain themselves in their neighborhoods, keeping it affordable for them, but also increasing their own income and capabilities, but improving their quality of life.
Would you like to add anything to that, Margaret? Or?
Sure. So I think that there's a lot of areas in Houston that can increase in their density, and people are moving into, we have looked at the inside the loop population, and people talk about the fact that the donut hole was emptying out in the early 90s, and it really wasn't. We didn't lose as much population as many people say. But I have looked at population and construction numbers inside the loop over the past 10 years, and we've increased construction projects, and we've increased the number of housing units by 26%, but we've only increased the number of people who live inside the loop by 11%. So we're building. We're just not bringing this. The number of people per household has dropped inside the loop from about half of a full percent, and so, or half of a full person. I'm sorry. So what we really need to focus on is how do we increase the interest of people to other areas beside Midtown. Midtown is really there is more construction in Midtown, and it's blowing and going, but there are other neighborhoods. And, the mayor talks, as part of his Complete Communities, talks a lot about build up, not out, but he says even more clearly and more frequently that he wants development without displacement. So it's a careful balancing act that you've got. How do we increase the capacity to hold as many residents in the city as we can while not pushing those who are already here out?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting juxtaposition when you talk about Midtown versus, say, Third Ward, because Midtown, by the way, if you were here 30 years ago, was nothing like
20
what it is
years
today.
ago.
20 years ago, yeah, really.
Even less.
I mean, it was, a wasteland.
fairgrounds.
I mean, really a void between downtown and the medical center, and it was a. But I think it's fair to say that it was not a lot of residential property, so it was mostly commercial, a lot of vacant property.
A lot of vacant.
A little bit of a different issue with Third Ward, though, because it is largely residential, and I know many neighborhoods are very sensitive to disruptive kind of development, particularly if it's out of character. So,
But one of the challenges in Third Ward is that there is so much vacant land there that increasing the density in Third Ward is really just bringing it back to what it had been in the 60s and the 70s, and that we can do that with maintaining people who live there now, that not pushing them out, but just filling in the holes that have been created over the past decades by what Shannon was talking about.
But are they being filled in with like or similar housing, or is it townhomes where there used to be single family?
I think it's
Portion of the neighborhood.
I think it's a variety, and I would argue that the variety is better.
Yeah.
I think every neighborhood in Houston needs to have a diversity of income and a diversity of housing stock, because my daughter's 26 years old, and we live in an area of Houston. She's a teacher. She's not going to be able. This is not where she's going to be able to buy her first house. And when I retire, am I going to be able to live there? So I think having a diversity of income that can allow the full spectrum of age to live in one neighborhood. You live near your parents.
I certainly do.
And that works really well for your life. And to be able to do that, I think, is a big benefit.
In Midtown for Third Ward, a lot of people considered that Third Ward until it got rebranded as Midtown. And the growth of the retail and commercial area over there has enhanced the quality of life. When I was moving back, so I grew up here and left to go to college in Boston and Chicago. And then I started my career in North Carolina, and I got used to having a neighborhood that had all the amenities that I needed without having to drive out of my neighborhood. But I made a decision moving back that I did want to invest my money in Third Ward because I wanted the neighborhood to grow, and for people who have a long tradition of being connected to that neighborhood, my mother had grown up in it, I wanted to be there, and the affordability is what allowed me to make that investment. But it was also really personal banking relationships. I went to several banks that refused to give me a mortgage for that, but developing relationships with particular bankers allowed for me to have the home loan that I needed in order to get into the house. But the growth of Midtown is what made it more convenient to have invested back in an urban neighborhood that for a long time has been under-resourced.
Yeah.
And so we're now seeing the growth of Third Ward beyond Midtown because of Midtown's proximity. So now we have the HEB that's coming that was long fought for. And there was an HEB on OST, but this is now going to be an HEB like the one on Dunleavy or the one on Buffalo Speedway.
A real HEB.
A real HEB that makes everybody happy. And so it's, but to have sustained in this neighborhood for almost 2 decades has not been an easy task. And so that is what we have been working on. The planning department did a brilliant job of working on the planning for the complete communities for the first round and identifying what residents need and want for their neighborhoods, but mostly also what their aspirations are.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think is so important in this process of talking about how Plan Houston relates to everyone. Because being able to capture people's aspirations for what they want their neighborhoods to be is really important. I'm sure if you even go to River Oaks, they have some things that they would love to see their neighborhood evolve into that they may not have had a community conversation about at this point in time. But the complete communities process has allowed residents to come together, whether they're renters or owners, business owners, and to really come together and talk about it with each other and make some decisions about where they want to see it go. And the city now has the capacity to bring in private and public financing that allows those aspirations to turn into reality. It isn't overnight. It's a very, very long process. As we will be embracing these million new people, we will be evolving these processes in order to welcome them and have housing for them. But they have to be able to be in all parts of Houston, not just selected neighborhoods.
And you know, one of the ways to tie this back to resilience is that one of the things that we've been able to accomplish so far, and I think Shannon's going to take it even further down the road, is we've been able to build community. When we went into a number of these communities, there was no sense of community. There was very little interaction among the residents, among the business owners, and in our first round of complete communities, we helped build this community. And the number one thing, I think, for making Houstonians more resilient is to be part of a community so that when something does happen, when we do have those shocks and stressors, you have someone to live through it with, you have someone to help, someone who knows that you need this type of help and can come get you. And I think that's a big part of what Marissa's doing in Houston is that she's helping us understand that resilience is not about water. It's part of it, but resilience is about all the other things that go into making Houston home. And I'm trying to remember now what the vision that's written in Blueprint Houston right now is, but
My brain just blanked.
but her resilience plan is really strengthening that vision that we wrote for Plan Houston.
Well, and it's also about, y'all have been talking about it, it's also not just the Harvey stressors, the natural disasters, stressors, shocks, call it what you want.
Both, probably.
But it's all about the slow-moving type of disasters, our aging infrastructure, the things of homelessness, the economic inequality, the ability to age in place or stay in your neighborhood. Those are just as important of factors in resilience. And you've got your hands full trying to wrap around all of that stuff and get it to where we've got an action plan to go forward.
We do have our hands full, but we have lots of capable partners that are helping. So through the resilience strategy process, we came up with a list of shocks and stresses that Houston is susceptible to. And the way that we're approaching resilience is really making sure that we're addressing where those shocks and stresses intersect. We know that our most vulnerable people, places, and systems are disproportionately affected in a disruption, whether it be a Harvey or whether it be losing a job or the power going out for, a day. And so how can we look comprehensively at all of those shocks and stresses and try and solve for more than one of them at a time? We have limited resources. All of these issues are very urgent. And so by taking that approach, we're able to move more things forward faster.
Can you list some of the things y'all are really looking at, to give people a broad idea
Sure.
of all of the factors you're looking at?
Yeah, so the way that we've sorted all of the shocks and stresses, whether they be flooding or extreme heat or affordable housing or homelessness, is in five sort of themes, 5 categories.
Okay.
And so those are equity and inclusion,
Okay.
infrastructure and the economy, health and safety, living with and sometimes without water, and then how are we looking at integrating housing and mobility.
Okay.
And so those 5 areas are what a number of folks, we have had working groups and a number of partners looking at how we achieve resilience in those 5 areas. And then we're also looking at resilience by scale, which is really important and gets to sort of the complete communities aspect of this work. So we're looking at resilience at an individual scale, a family, a small business, a parcel level.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at resilience at a neighborhood scale, recognizing that each neighborhood in Houston is going to prioritize different shocks and stresses. And so how can we work on a neighborhood scale to identify what those priorities are? And so a lot of that can be done through the complete communities for those 10 neighborhoods. And then we'll have to look at how we do that in other neighborhoods. And then we're looking at the bayou scale, which is an exciting way of looking at a holistic approach to resilience. The bayous have a number of roles that they can play in building resilience. In addition to sort of flood mitigation, also recreation or social cohesion or different ways to do transportation. So then we're looking at city resilience, and that's important, how the city solves for more than one thing, how we're efficient and effective at that. And then finally looking at regional resilience in recognition that the shocks and stresses that we're talking about don't know jurisdictional boundaries, and we really need to be working with partners in counties, in the region, in other cities, and at the state and federal and global level at how we address some of these issues. So that's our scope.
It's an interesting scope too, and one of our previous sessions had even made me rethink how big we are because of what you're talking about on the regional schedule, the area. The city is, depending on which day of the week, I think somebody says it's 669 square miles or 650, whatever. It's big. But the thing that blew my mind was when we saw the extraterritorial jurisdiction, which you're having to deal with because we have some, quote, control, unquote, on that. It's 1,700 and some odd square miles. It's bigger than Connecticut or Rhode Island, one of the two.
Okay,
I think Connecticut, yeah.
I think it's
I'm
Connecticut.
reading exact statistics. You asked me
You
these
just happen to have it.
And so every time somebody says something on press release, I'll text them, nope, that's the wrong number. 671.2 square miles for the Houston city limits and an additional 1,171 square miles in our ETJ.
1171. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So
I was close.
you are very
So
close.
that's well over 1,700 if I'm
Yeah.
adding this correctly.
Yeah, but it's back to what you're talking about. It's not just our problem. It's a much broader scope, and I had sort of remembered your 5 categories, and I was glad everybody else has got to hear it too. And so, getting back to some of our questions, knowing all those things are going on, knowing that development is going to continue happening, how do you guys really foresee that we change, in essence, the growth trajectory of the city and then obviously the neighborhoods? I mean, I live in the Montrose. It is growing, and it's second or third densest area of the city from the last numbers I saw, and it's not going to get any less. And it's doing what the mayor talked about. It's going up instead of out.
It needs to get more dense, and it needs
And
to
it's
not
getting
get
there.
any less. Yeah. So Gulfton's our most dense area, obviously.
Yeah.
And And the challenge we have in Gulfton as part of the first round of Complete Communities is that it is really a mono-income culture. It is
True.
it is incredibly monolithic in terms of who lives there, and the country of origin is dramatically broad, but the other characteristics. And so how can the city help, break some of that up without displacing the folks that live there? How can we help bring in more people of means who can then bring with them more retail services and other services that come with that, so that the residents who live here now can experience more amenities in their neighborhood. And Shannon's working very hard on working with banks and working with retail development and working with all sorts of private entities in order to help diversify that area.
Right, and the housing stock there has aged, and so working through maintaining the affordability but improving the quality of housing is hugely
I was
important.
going to say it hasn't changed much in the last 20 or 30 years that I can think of.
It has
Do you remember when it was swinging singles?
Do
Yeah,
I
oh,
ever?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
But now we
Colonial
have,
House, was that the
With
that
Michael
would be
Pollock.
new information
Yeah.
for me. But the social services that are available in the neighborhood have been very carefully planned out to be within walking distance of many of the residents, and they are all co-located. So the Southwest Multi-Service Center is right there, the Baker Ripley Complex, Legacy Health is there, KIP has a massive campus in that area that has elementary through 12th grade there. So we can see that the neighborhood can support the density. We just have to bring more educational opportunities, more job opportunities. There's conversations now about trying to start light manufacturing in that area, in the same way that we're seeing some of that work being done in Second Ward, another one of the Complete Communities. And so looking at holistically what the neighborhood needs. Just as Margaret was talking about the mono-income households, there are ways for that to be diversified if people can walk to their jobs. And so figuring out how we do that. But that neighborhood is sandwiched between Bel Air and the Galleria, and it is prime for gentrification because of its amazing location. And so we don't want to bring so much to it that it pushes those residents out. And so we're staying very focused on how we go through this whole economic development process for Gulfton in a way that maintains the residents there and allows it to actually add more. As we were saying, it's the most dense, but it has the most ethnic diversity in the city of Houston. I think one last number was 170,000 people and 93 languages spoken in the Gulfton area. We need to preserve that as a city.
Yeah.
That is not just a benefit to the neighborhood, it is truly a benefit to all of us. But through the Complete Communities process, the Gulfton residents have invited more people to come to their neighborhood to experience their diversity. And so there was a mural project that the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, led by Debbie McNulty, helped to spearhead with residents and nonprofit organizations in Gulfton so that people can go and see a dozen murals painted throughout the community. And those murals are markers for finding some of the great restaurants that are there, some of the great community activities, and really bringing attention to the neighborhood based on what the residents want people to see and appreciate about their neighborhood.
So you mentioned gentrification, and I know that's a sort of a hot button issue. If we a lot of the new development that we're seeing, the denser development, I'm working on several of them as an architect. High-rise, multifamily projects, and I can assure you that these are not what we would consider affordable units. And I mean the economics of the developer are, it costs this much to build it, and the land is expensive because it's in the inner city, and this is what the rent has to be in order to make the project work. So I don't think I'm making an unfair statement when I say a lot of the development that we're seeing, a lot of this development activity within the areas that we want to see it is how do we make it affordable? I mean, it's by nature
a really
going to be
good
expensive.
question, and that's the $64,000 question. How do we make development, and how do we make sure that what we're building is not just for those who are coming from outside of the neighborhood? We've got a challenge in Houston with the idea that drive until you can afford to buy mentality. And Marissa's got a couple of slides in her resilience plan that shows that when you look at just the cost of housing inside the city of Houston, there are certain areas that the vast majority of the Houston region, looking at just the cost of housing, the exterior parts, the suburbs, are very reasonably and fit into people's 30% of income metric. When you add on the transportation costs, that affordable area out in the suburbs is no longer affordable. 15% you have to add on for transportation costs. And so now living inside Houston is affordable. So maybe that's something we need to start marketing and letting people know that we are really a far more affordable place inside, because you don't need, when's the last, you don't drive your car to work every day.
Very rarely.
Yeah, and so, there are ways to get around. And the opportunity zones, we haven't talked about that at all, but the opportunity zones that are, coming in, the mayor was very strategic in how he selected census tracts to be included in the opportunity zones. And when we submitted those to the governor's office, we submitted 200 and something, a number of which were in the complete communities, but throughout Houston. And we now have 99 that came back, do I have the number right? That came back from the governor's office. And so that's an opportunity for Houston to bring some investment into these lower income areas. And when they do, the opportunity to have it be affordable is great there. With the rules associated with an opportunity zone and the fact that there are the capital gains deferrals and all of that, you can build something less expensive for either rental or ownership in those areas.
And in the complete communities, there are 56 opportunity zones, census tract opportunity zones. Our Office of Economic Development for the mayor that has Gwen Tillotson and Andy Icken working on these issues. They have been working hard to interest developers into opportunity zones that are in the complete communities and other neighborhoods throughout the city. But what we're finding is a lot of developers are still interested in the opportunity zones that are in the traditional spaces to build, and that's downtown. And so it's helping to change the mindset. There are mechanisms that have been put into place. Opportunity zones is a concept that started in the Obama era and got implemented in the Trump administration. And it is a true opportunity to bring long-term investment into low to moderate income neighborhoods. But we now have to also have the developers being willing to go to places that they do not traditionally build in. And that's how we'll be able to get the affordability. So I think it's going to be the communities also asking them. I mean, architects, know all of these people and everything. And so if you're working with the residents to help them to try to attract that, that's what we definitely need. We'll be having an investors conference this fall, and it's going to be important for all folks in Houston to come together to make sure that we're marketing all these opportunities to the investors from across the country as an option for them. The Opportunity Zones concept was really designed for cities that were under distress. Houston's not that. And so it's a little difficult for them to start to reimagine, the investors from other places, to reimagine what will work in Houston, because they're trying to use the models from the other cities that have much more distress, like Detroit. And that's not us. And so I think it's really important for Houston to do what it always does, which is come together to present its best face and all of the opportunities that people have never really imagined a city can do. We always shock and surprise everyone as to how different and capable we are. And I think this is an amazing time for all of us to really come together to make that case to the investors through the investor funds and opportunity zones.
Yeah. I think the other piece of it, though, is maybe not even financial, but as looking at what I have control over in the Planning and Development Department, how do our regulations affect affordability in Houston? Are there levers that I can turn and that the mayor can instruct me to turn that will make affordable housing more available, easier to build we have a maximum 27 single-family units per acre. Is that the right number? We require parking, in associated with residential development. Is that the way to do it? There's a ton of questions we need to be asking ourselves. What are the rules that we have in place, and how can we adjust them? Should we adjust them all, or which ones should we adjust that could help builders and developers bring in more affordability into Houston?
Marissa's been wanting to know about garage apartments, right?
Accessory dwelling units.
Yes.
So that's the
And you've
formal
probably been
name.
told that
know.
there's nothing that says you can't do it, right? I mean,
No, in fact, in single-family residential neighborhoods, you may build a garage apartment.
Yeah.
It can be either a duplex. In Houston's definition, single-family is 2 units, either duplex or if the second one is smaller, up to 900 square feet. Every city in America is looking at changing their zoning rules to allow ADUs, and we've been doing it since the 60s.
Yeah.
They're called accessory
Dwelling
Or
units.
ADUs, and granny flats.
Right, and so they can serve a number of purposes, including having family closer, living by you, maybe too close, but hopefully close enough. Or they can be rented out as a second income, which could help.
Somebody stay in place.
Correct. And so they also help with densifying a neighborhood that is, really low density, but so it's appropriate densification and doesn't, keeps the character of the neighborhood. And so there are a lot of opportunities, and yes, I am very pleased and kind of surprised that it's easy to do here. And so through the resilient strategy process, we're contemplating how to promote that and what benefits could reach various populations through that
And
program.
you're also looking at how to restructure them a little bit. Right now, ADUs have to be on the same lot, and the fee simple. They're not fee simple. Maybe we could make them that. Maybe there's a way to carve out that garage apartment where you could actually sell it.
And I could buy it.
And you could buy the ADU. Right now, if you have if you have a house and 2 ADUs on your property, it's now commercial, and you are required to have all that much more parking. Well, is that appropriate? So all of these questions we need to be asking ourselves.
Well, that comes back to the whole resilience issue, and don't forget complete communities, but resilience is as much about economics and the viability of the city as an operating unit, to tell you the truth, and assuring our long-term so that we don't end up like other cities that have issues. So, I mean, and that's what I think most people don't really understand is resilience isn't just about the storms and all of that stuff. It's about how we proceed and develop, and how we grow, and how we respond to our citizens.
Yes, I have a colleague, CRO, Chief Resilience Officer from around the world, who talks about it as the city's immune system.
It's a good analogy.
It sure is. And so thinking about, not just planning for, the last things that we've experienced, but really looking into the future and trying to assess what some of the challenges may be. One of those challenges that's come up is around economics, is around energy diversification and around the employment base in Houston and the job base. And as technologies change, as energy transition occurs, how do we maintain our way of, our quality of life? How do we maintain jobs? How do we provide appropriate training in order to make sure that we thrive in the face of change rather than get disrupted? And so looking sort of holistically at all of those issues so that we can keep our immune system healthy.
Yeah, that's a very good analogy. So.
Let's talk a little bit about the process. So the resiliency plan, I guess, is something that really was just initiated within the last year, and then you've currently are at a point where you've completed an assessment.
Correct.
And then over the next several months, I think you're going to devise a resiliency plan. Is that the right term for it?
I use strategy, but it's a plan.
Okay. And so then how do we go about implementing it? How do we make sure this is something that can just go on and kind of run itself? Because I think this is a sort of a limited time program, isn't it? The resilient, the Rockefeller, what is it? The 101. I guess it's now 101.
Sure.
Resilient cities. So how do we make sure this thing has legs and keeps on going?
Sure. So Houston was announced as the 101st city in August of 2018 at the 1-year anniversary of Harvey. And so over the last 10 months are we at, give or take? There's been this process, a lot of assessment, and we had 100 or so person working group that was made up of a coalition of coalitions, and they came up with a number of ideas, as well as other partners came up with a number of ideas, and we're currently in the process of sorting through those ideas and trying to link them together and figure out how best to incorporate them and prioritize them. And so once the resilience strategy is launched, then it'll be all about implementation. My position and our current program are funded through February of 2021 through a grant that went to the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities by the Shell Corporation. But we're already starting to make plans for what that looks like after that time frame is up, because I like to talk about resilience being a value and a practice, and we're never gonna be done practicing it. But we're really focused on implementation, and we're looking at specific areas of implementation. And so I believe on my 6th or so day at the City of Houston, Mayor Turner announced that we were going to link the smart cities work in the city to addressing our most urgent needs in the resilience strategy. And so we're working on linking those two initiatives. And then we're looking at communication and education opportunities. We're looking at innovative finance opportunities, a whole host of sort of implementation measures that we can link together, so that once we sort of have our framework, we can work with everybody in the city, every partner, but every individual. I mean, resilience is really everybody's job, and everybody has a role to play in resilience. And some of my work is just to explain to people that what they're already doing is building resilience, but we need them to do more of it.
So how does this apply to complete communities? Because there was kind of an initial stage of 5 communities, and they completed an action plan. I guess they were for each of those, and then so that's, I guess, has moved into an implementation phase. But then you've got now 5 new communities that are sort of going through the same process. So you're really working at 2 different stages of the program, I guess. And then presumably, if you get more resources, additional complete communities may be identified. And then, so how do you do all of those things at once?
With all of the departments and divisions of City Hall working in conjunction with the Office of Complete Communities, there's no way that our one office could be in charge of all of the work. It really is our task is to help coordinate the implementation strategies, to track those implementation strategies, and to report out on them. We also are in place to help bring more attention to the work that's being done in support of the complete communities in the various departments, and in conjunction with the neighbors and our corporate and philanthropic investors into the concept. And then we also are working to raise money. It's a public-private partnership, the whole initiative. But yes, it started with the planning process that Margaret's office, department, not office, it's a very big department, led, and that was 3,500 people participating in 14 community engagement meetings. And from those community engagement meetings, we came out with those residents' aspirations and goals, and they were put into these action plans. So it's Acres Home, Gulfton, near North Side, 2nd Ward, and 3rd Ward were the first 5. And we are now at the phase of identifying the high impact and high priority projects and programs. The neighbors let us know what they thought was most important and what time frame they wanted to see them done. But we're also meshing that with our ability to get things done as quickly as possible with partners that are willing to come in with us very quickly and move things forward. But we have a goal of getting it all done. But we also recognize that the city does not have the finances to handle all of this on our own, nor do we actually have the human power to make sure that it happens on a time frame that's accelerated. Margaret's department is still trying to fill some vacancies because she has very well-trained folks who move on to do great things in other places, and we have to continue to fill the City Hall jobs. But now that Marissa is here and leading her resiliency efforts, we're able to incorporate a lot of what's going on with the resiliency strategy into what we're going to do for the planning process for the next round of Complete Communities. There are lessons that we've learned post-Harvey through the Complete Communities planning process that is very important to incorporate. We just did a tour of Kashmir Gardens, one of the 5 new Complete Communities, which are A-Leaf, Fort Bend, Houston, Kashmir Gardens, Magnolia Park, Manchester, and Sunnyside. And going out to Kashmir Gardens, you can still clearly see places where Harvey's devastation is still present. We can't ignore that when we go back and start the planning process. So we have to be very careful in this go round to use the lessons we've learned the first time to improve the process the second time, and also help our residents really identify what can be transformational for their neighborhoods that we can actually make happen, right? And be very clear with our action plans on that. It's a really exciting process because we also have an end goal of the planning process being a deeply ingrained part of the civic engagement process. All of the action plans list civic engagement as their first priority. And so now that could just be alphabetical order, but really?
No, affordable housing would be first. A's come before C.
But it is civic engagement. And we want folks to come out of that planning process knowing how to work together to move things forward in their neighborhood. That is one of the most important outcomes of this. Living in Greater Third Ward, I see the power of that on a daily basis, right? Is the community that really does know what they're doing in terms of bringing attention to the neighborhood. Just getting Dowling Street renamed Emancipation in what, a year?
Yeah.
That was, for here, that was fast.
That's extremely fast.
I think that's fast for any place.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I think that, so I want to take it back to Plan Houston for just a moment. And the first strategy identified in Plan Houston is spend money wisely. And one of the action steps identified in Spend Money Wisely is to collaborate more, to bring in partners, to work together. We are an organization, the 3 of us are in each other's offices, probably more than any other group of people, but it goes beyond just the 3 of us. We work and collaborate with just about every department in the city of Houston. Marissa's got everybody, even in Harris County, on her speed dial. And, Shannon's talking to not only everybody in the Department of Neighborhoods and the Planning Department and Solid Waste and traffic and all of those. And, we collaborate with everybody. And this is an organization now that is really kind of humming on the idea that we are not silos. We've kind of busted that idea. And she said it, I think, more clearly about Houston's got this special, we are able to do things in Houston that many other cities aren't. And I think the fact that we've accomplished that we're going to have a resilience strategy, and Marissa's only been in town for 10 months. We've got
4.5 months.
I'm sorry, 4.5 months. We'll have it.
By the time she's been here 10 months, yes. We will have that.
We are all able to put the shoulder to the grind to the wheel and really work toward what Houstonians have said they needed. We can accomplish a great deal when we work together, and we're doing that every day.
Well, I think also the three of you exemplify something that what you're saying about how Houston has this attitude of we can do it. I think it's more of an attitude, what do you mean we can't do it?
That could be it.
So, I mean, it's just,
That could be it.
it's always been a city that if we really start talking to each other, if we start thinking about what we all benefit out of this thing, that we can accomplish things.
What do we have? One of the largest ports in the world, and we're 50 miles inland.
Inland, I know, I know. And it's still mind-boggling to.
And it's appropriate
people.
now to say we were the first, we put people on the moon.
That's true. I think it's
I
this
still-
Saturday.
That was a team effort.
I actually still, well, it was. And my dad was on that team, and I still have the slide rule that he did it with. So, I mean, he didn't
Yeah.
even have, the computers that he didn't have.
They would, yeah.
That's great.
But
Well, and that's you just said the magic word. It's teamwork,
Yeah.
and that's what these three are talking about. Is between the three of them, and it's also the other departments. And I think it's for the first time in a long time we've had a lot of that cooperation.
yeah, we do.
Amongst, because if we're going to start doing the things the neighborhoods need to do, it's not just your office, it's not these two offices, it's everybody doing it. So I've got to start my wrap up now. So
Okay.
I hope you'll continue to follow us. We'll do our best to let you know when we're going to be here next, because these conversations need to continue happening, and the best way to do it is to hopefully get people like Margaret and Shannon and Marissa out here so you can understand what's going on and where we need to go. So we, again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We hope you've enjoyed it. And on part of Blueprint Houston, if you'd like to see some of the past episodes, go to blueprinthouston.org. It's there. And go to Houston Media Source and look at their website. It also has the previous issues. So with that, I'd like to say a good night. And again, thank each of you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having
you all.
us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope I got it.